Welcome to the Bells I Hear podcast. We will speak with experts who will debunk the myths and misconceptions surrounding homelessness and highlight the innovative approaches for addressing the issues, causes, and consequences of housing insecurity. I'm Elisa Smith, your host, a mentor, professor of legal studies, and former public defender. Thanks for tuning in to the Bells I Hear. Today on the Bells I Hear, we're continuing our series exploring the intersection of law and homelessness. In this episode, we are focusing on the relationships between housing insecurity and youth justice to help us understand how housing insecurity and homelessness shapes young lives and what solutions might be best to address these issues. We are joined by Sofie Fashana and Josh Cogan. Sofie is a human rights advocate focused on policies that directly support youth outreach, and she also serves as a liaison with the ABA Commission on Homelessness and Poverty. Josh serves on the ABA's Commission on Homelessness and Poverty as well, and is the policy director at A Way Home America, with years of experience in advocacy and systems change. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
So wonderful to have you both. Let's start by exploring the scope of this issue. When we talk about youth homelessness, who are the youth? Is this a widespread problem? Are some young people more vulnerable to housing insecurity and homelessness than others?
Thank you so much for having us. And, when we're talking about youth homelessness, a lot of the population that I've worked with is like 14, ages 18 to 24. That's just one population of young adults who are experiencing homelessness. Another is young people who are aging out of the foster care system. Those that could be in some states 18, other states it could be 21 based on their state policies. But we see, for about 4.2 million young people who are experiencing homelessness, as well as about 34,000 unaccompanied minors. And so we see a variety of individuals, and that pathway looks different for everybody. Somebody can be aging out of foster care system that can lead to housing instability. We see a lot of times young people who get kicked out of homes or because of a parent or the family doesn't agree with an identity they have, or the economic crisis. There's some people who can't afford. And so there are just so many different pathways, and sometimes it's hidden. And that's something that I think the quote unquote media definition of homelessness doesn't always look like a young person experiencing homelessness. And so, because there are so many ways that a young person can experience homelessness, as well as so many ways that can look like, if that's, sleeping in a car or being a student. Also, I think going back to the first question, student homelessness is also a huge thing that we see within this space. I'll pass it to you, Josh.
Yeah, I think Sofie really highlighted the word hidden, which speaks to your question about is who and is this widespread, right? Because youth who are experiencing homelessness or at risk of experiencing homelessness are hiding in plain sight, and it is widespread. However, we see that what is in front of us, so that is chronically homeless adults. So our youth are often forgotten. So youth experiencing homelessness in general are vulnerable, more vulnerable than other populations experiencing homelessness. And then when we really lock in, and where Away Home America focuses with our public policy efforts, when we think about Black youth, Indigenous youth, youth of color, and LGBTQIA plus youth, we look through a targeted universalism lens because these are our most vulnerable populations, subpopulations within youth homelessness. And it's not that we're only focused on these subpopulations. We have this belief through the targeted universalism approach that when we focus on our most marginalized, we can we can end youth homelessness for all youth when we focus through that lens.
Oh, that's interesting. There's a lot to unpack there. And so I want to go back to something Sofie said. She mentioned unaccompanied youth. You also touched on foster care and then these marginalized groups that you're targeting to help address that issue. So I want to unpack those three things. Let's start with unaccompanied youth. What is an unaccompanied youth?
Yeah, literally by definition, unaccompanied youth just means that you don't have a legal parent or guardian with you. Now, there are nuanced cases where you may have a sibling with you, maybe. But by definition, broadly speaking, you essentially are alone.
There's no parent. Yeah. And the issue with foster care is, so how do those two things interconnect? Because you would think, most people probably think that, well, if somebody's an unaccompanied youth, there are no parents, then the legal system or the social services system must be involved, and then they would come into the foster care system. Why is that not happening?
I think there's also unaccompanied who are runaway. And so, yes, if they're a minor, technically, in a lot of states, they would be part of the child welfare space, the system. But sometimes also a young person runs away, who knows where they're at. And so I think when it comes to youth experiencing homelessness, and particularly these populations, I think, one, I just don't think we have the right system in place really to support the young people who are, they might be 16 or they might be 14, but are adults who are taking care of their siblings, and maybe they are in foster care, or they've ran away from foster care homes. Because I think one thing to understand too, the system is not built for young people. And there's some families in the foster care system who are not, for not always create a safe environment. And talking about, I talked about identity, like individuals leaving and fleeing homes because of identities they carry or identities they have. Sometimes foster homes don't accept that. So you could have an unaccompanied youth who, let's say, ends up in the foster care system, but then the foster family, it's not a safe home for them. And so they run away. And so I think that's also another aspect of it that we need to talk about. But I think going back, sorry, I just wanted to correct my data too. I said 34,000. That was 34,000 unaccompanied youth who experienced homelessness on a given night in 2023. And so not the full, but just wanted to correct it.
Well, it's another issue, right? Counting is a very difficult issue with homelessness generally. It's certainly going to be difficult with young people who maybe not self-reporting that they are in this situation, because there is a stigma, even though there shouldn't be. There is a stigma to it, so they hide those things. I also read recently, there was a quote in the National Center for Housing and Child Welfare in a report that described the back door of the foster care system was the front door to homelessness. And that struck me as incredibly sad, because, you think at least if there are kids in the foster care system, so there's all these other groups as well who have housing insecurity and homelessness, but we have this group of kids that are in the foster care system, and somehow we are not helping them to transition after being in foster care. So we're not giving them the social supports they need. Can you tell me a little bit about that? What is happening? What's the gap in services that is not capturing these kids to prevent them from going into homelessness?
Yeah, I can jump in here to start. So your question, I think there's a through line to what Sofie said earlier of the system is broken. So when we look through a policy lens, we have limited resources, whether it's federal, whether it's state, whether it's local government. All of those levels of government are having the same issue of, we only have so much money, we only have so many resources, and we have all of this red tape, and that is just a nightmare. And so it goes back to the earlier comment of chronically homeless adults are right in front of us. Homeless youth are out of sight, so not even on the back burner, sometimes not even on the stove. And so when you're competing for those limited resources, the dollars, the programs, the caseworkers, not to even mention just recently in our current political climate, just this mass exodus out of social work. So as a result of policy decisions. So this is all going to continue to domino effect, and youth and young adults are going to continue to be hurt. And youth and young adults do grow up. And so if we do not give them the resources, we don't give them the programs, we don't give the allocations to funding for youth and young adult homelessness, they will become chronically homeless adults, and we're going to continue to repeat the cycle.
And then following up after that too, I think, to a question about the front door to the back door, I think about how many of us at age 18 knew everything, like figure it out life, figure it out, like we know exactly what we want to do, what school to go to. And with no help. And while doing all of that, we have to have a full-time job and paying all our bills. And so we see that when at age 18 or 21 in some states, New York State just extended their support for foster youth until age 26. So there is a program that does coaching for young people. And so maybe there's resources, but I think the lack of social network is a huge aspect of individuals experiencing homelessness. And we see in the data too, 50% of young people who age out of the foster care system experience homelessness by age 26. And that is such a transitional time that we have to show up for the young people. And that looks different, and that needs to look creative, and it needs to give autonomy too, because as much as also we all can remember how much autonomy we want, how much finally we're 18, we can go do things. Finally we're 21, we can go do other things. So these programs need to be tailored and designed by young people, that if we are talking about how do we end the backdoor entrance. And so to your question, there is also 67% of young people ages 18 to 20, was it 30, get financial support from their parents and traditional household. And that is missing within this population. And that looks like rental help. That looks like phone bills. Many people don't pay for their subscriptions and transportation. It's such a high pressure time to figure out everything while also transitioning and everything. So that's also why it is so easy to slip. And then I think for young people who are, experience the foster care system, the social network, there's not a lot of people have the social network. Some of the programs in New York that extended to 26, they're helping people how to do laundry, or how to take the metro, or how do you apply for these things, and resume. I know for me, when I'm applying to things, I'm sending my resume to 5 people to make sure they're vetting it. But if you don't have that, how do you get the right job that actually pays you at the right salary? So to you. So those are the things that I think we need to be really creative about. Right now, the administration is trying to do a home for every child campaign is going on right now. And so states are the target is to this comment: how do we end young people who are aging out of the foster care system to experiencing homelessness? The pipeline, ending that pipeline. And so I know some states have signed up, but I think there's also shortcomings with these campaigns, because not every home is safe. And I think that's also something to remember, and not kinship care also have gone really popular in the foster care system to transition young people. And that's not always a solution for everybody. So I think not having one idea and running with it for every child is also really important when we're talking about long-term upward mobility.
Right. And as you were both talking, I was thinking, there's no one size fits all solution, right? There's, you described all of these nuanced differences and the different subpopulations of young people that are experiencing insecurity and homelessness. And so there can't just be one solution. There's no one umbrella solutions that's going to fix all of these issues for them. So, I'm going to ask probably a hard question, but if you had the ability to fix youth homelessness, how would you go about doing it? If someone came to you and said, resources are not an issue, time, money, none of these things are issue, and we could fix this, how would you as experts fix all of these subpopulations issues to prevent youth homelessness?
You're
I'll
giving
give you a
us a
simple
magic
one.
wand.
Yes, but it has to be a very specific policy-driven magic wand. So if by some happenstance, politicians are listening to this broadcast and they say, I love that idea. What ideas do you have that could manifest in fixing the problem we have and preventing it from moving forward?
Yeah, I can hop in real quick.
Yeah.
The short answer I would give folks, that I do give folks on the Hill when we meet with different offices, is taking a look at our Away Home America's 119th Congressional Policy Agenda. We have sound, concrete recommendations that touch different sections. To your point of no, there's not going to be one solution, right? So this solution, recommendation 1, might fit for this subpopulation. Recommendation 2 might fit for this subpopulation, and together those pieces can end youth homelessness. Happy to dig into the nitty gritty of those recommendations and some of the legislation that we are supporting. But that is the simple answer for us: is taking a look at our 119th congressional policy agenda, which is on our website,
Okay.
and we can dive in deeper from there. So yeah.
Great.
Thanks, Josh. This issue is a root issue. We see so many times it's generational too. And the way the system has been built and the policing, the surveillance has been so targeted to certain communities. And so I don't think we can talk about solutions without talking about, how do we also name that? And a big part that I've seen that's been effective is a tax law. Like, not that I'm a tax expert, but we saw, during COVID, the stimulus check, poverty rates going down, people are getting housed. Wisconsin did eviction stop, so they stopped evictions happening, and people were actually housed, and people stayed in their homes, and they were able to raise their children. And not only that, one of the things Wisconsin found is the entry to like family separation actually lowered because of that. Like, families were actually able to parent their child because they didn't have to worry about being evicted. And so one solution is, like, we need to fix the tax laws to actually benefit families and the everyday people of this country who are facing a lot of struggles. And until we fix the tax laws to actually benefit, if that's childcare, if that's, tax credit back, like, I think that is a huge root cause of it. Another thing is that, some of the work that I'm doing right now is looking at what are the claiming laws with government fundings. And so, for example, going back to Wisconsin's they figured out how to use cash to support families instead of separating families. So it was an initiative to house families and keep kids with their parents. And they used the same dollars they would use to put a young person in the foster care system to actually do wraparound service in the whole family. And then we're also seeing different ways that agencies are able to claim, motivational interview claiming dollars. So how do we streamline public dollars to give back to the community? So flexible cash using public dollars and figuring out what are the fiscal claiming strategies and to do that. So I think those are some of the things directly. I also think part of this work is also when we're talking about unaccompanied youth who don't have parents, how do we wrap around them? And have the social network, I don't think we have figured that out in our space. How do we really give like a mutual aid social network to a young person? And so figuring that out is also another thing, because money is great, but we also need to make sure that we're supporting them full round.
Right. That there's this social network, like a safety net for them. And it sounds like, we tend to do the one size fits all approach, which doesn't work. And both of you seem to be suggesting, that we take these programs and target them more to meet certain needs and reallocate resources, that we might be wasting resources by putting people in temporary environments instead of giving them stable housing, which would prevent the problem, sounds like. And one of the ways that I think we might be able to also save resources is that there are long-term negative consequences for youth experiencing youth homelessness. Can you tell us a little bit about what those long-term negative consequences are for these kids?
I can start. I would say, some of the things that I did a listening session with foster youth who experienced the system, and some of them were second generation. And so the cycle's not ending at their parent, it's continuing. They went to the system. Another thing is the mental health. Like, it takes a toll. Like, spend a day outside in a tent and tell me how your mental health is. It just takes such a toll on your body, and it ages you alone. And so when we're talking about the physical but also mental toll it takes to just figure out, what do I eat? How do I go find another bed to sleep in? Who do I ask for a couch tonight? You can't focus on the things you want to do. Like, we are failing young people because they're amazing individuals who have dreams, who have aspiration. And there's no space to go do that because they're worried about the day-to-day aspect. And so the long-term consequences is not only individual, but it's societal. Like, we don't have our next leaders. We don't have our teachers. We're not actually supporting the next who are going to run this country. the next president would like. So I feel like that is some of the long-term consequences that we are seeing, is that the cycle continues, one, and two, we're really not fostering the people who are going to be here leading this country.
Yeah, and I'll just say too, I think Sophie captured a major part of what we see with the long-term negative consequences. To give two quick example anecdotes as well to make it real for folks as well is one thing is the prison to homelessness pipeline or homelessness to prison pipeline. And a very specific example of that is if I'm a runaway or unaccompanied youth for whatever reason, maybe I was forced out of my home, I probably don't have my birth certificate with me. I probably don't have those pieces, those vital documents that I need to get a job. And so how am I going to survive? How am I going to get food? And so that's when we start getting into the nuance of that homelessness to prison pipeline, because maybe because I can't get a job, because I can't get a safe place to stay, I'm making these decisions that then put me in trouble with the laws that we have on our books right now, right? So then I go to prison, and then getting out of prison, then we're running into the same issue of getting a job because now I have a criminal record. That's one anecdote. Another anecdote, we see a lot of curfew laws pop up in different locales. We see that here in DC. And we saw it in Dallas when I lived in Dallas at the time. And one thing during COVID specifically, and one thing that I was advocating for with our council members in Dallas at the time that unfortunately fell on deaf ears was we are not considering the case scenarios that I am loitering after curfew in a place I'm not supposed to be because I have no place to go. And there was all this onus in the conversations, and it still happens here in DC and other locales, where the onus is on the parent. The onus is on the legal guardians, but we're not thinking as policymakers, what if there is no parent or guardian in place? And now it goes back to the first anecdote that I brought, that now I am arrested, I'm taken to jail, and then good luck getting a job after that. And we just continue the cycle because we are thinking, going back to the one size solution, we're thinking, oh, majority of youth have parents and guardians. It's their fault. Let's put the onus on them, but we're not thinking about the cases when there's not a parent or guardian in place.
Those exceptional circumstances, which are not really that exceptional. There's a lot of people that fall in these categories. And I think about, there was a case maybe recently where, and it may have been California, where they were litigating this issue about I think they were doing the camp sweeps. And one of the arguments that they were making is that there was simply not enough shelter for people. Like, where do you want people to go? You're criminalizing them, you're punishing them, but you're also not giving them options for where they can go. There was simply statistically, economically, not enough housing. And so it's almost like one hand doesn't know what the other hand is doing. And these short-term solutions, it's funny because, I mean, these poor children who have no choice are having to live moment by moment, as described by Sophie. But it almost sounds like that's how our government's working as well. It's just this short-sighted, moment by moment, no long-term solutions. And it's really unfortunate. The law seems to be failing. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah. And I think too, just real quick, the shelters, the short-term solutions, and part in the analogy, it's a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. And we're constantly in crisis mode of the here and the now as policymakers, and we're not looking down the road. And I'm not saying just completely abolish shelters. There is a real crisis moment for someone in need right now, and we don't need to allocate all of our resources in that short-term solution that one is not for everyone, because you touched on there's just not space, there's not enough beds, and the solution is not more beds. There are other solutions, but also youth and young adults oftentimes are not safe in those adult shelters, even if they are 18 to 24 and are legally an adult. That is not a safe space for them. So we have to deal with the crisis, but also go towards the long-term solution. And then that creates infighting within our broader homelessness advocacy movement, because now direct providers might be listening to me right now and saying, well, he's saying get rid of what I'm doing. And there is a bit of that, but it's not, hey, we're not taking away this. And yeah, we are saying don't add beds, or I am. I'm not saying we, but I, as Josh Cogan, am saying we don't need more beds. We need other solutions. So,
Right. Well, shelters were supposed to be temporary.
right.
It's supposed to be temporary. It's supposed to be, temporary before you help people to get permanent housing. And it's that second piece that seems to me, hasn't developed, that there is no pipeline to stable housing for adults or youth, quite frankly.
And I think, like, really quick to add to that, New York City has shelter for every person, like the right to shelter, but California doesn't. And so that looks different when somebody's coming in and asking for a bed for the night. I also want to be really mindful too in thinking about, yes, we come from the policy lens, but like we also need to bring people with lived experience in this conversation. And talk about, I feel like sometimes it's easy to talk about the theories and the idea of what would look like solution, but I think, how do we have actually co-design these conversations and co-design these policies? So I also want to name that. I think part of this conversation and that, the work of this in the space is really the co-design with those most impacted and who are experiencing it if they choose to.
Oh yeah, it's critical, right, to get the voices of the people who are impacted and the people that could look at a policy and say, that looks great on paper. Let me tell you how it plays out in the real world. Because sometimes those two things are very different, right? So, I think it's very important to have those voices and have those solutions come as much from the bottom up as they do from the top down. How did both of you get involved in this kind of advocacy? You've both been doing it for a while. It's important work. What brought you to this issue?
For me, really, this work is really personal to me. I have experience in the child welfare, but I also have my own experience in instability. And so I started working at our housing authority, and I was like, why are these vouchers not being used by young people in the foster care system? We saw a high rate of youth experiencing homelessness, but the vouchers were sitting. And so I started as a young person advocate, and then been doing policy now past few years. But really this work has been, there's a quote that I love. It says, the children almost broken by the world are the ones who dare enough to do something. And I feel like that is my why of like, I really want, like, I think for me, I wish somebody saw me. I wish somebody gave me that autonomy and allowed me to kind of mess up and fail, but also have the cushion to get back up. Like, it's kind of trampolines, one of those trampolines in the backyard. And a lot of times when you have instability, you don't have a trampoline to bounce back up. You either fall hard or people kind of walk away. And so that is kind of my why of like, there's so many young people and it's such a vulnerable transition, but exciting time. Like, let's not forget how exciting it is to be young and to figure out what you want to do, to try things, to fail. And so that's kind of why I started doing this work, is that I really wanted to support the little girl in me and the person that I wish showed up. And so that's kind of my why. And I've went from youth experiencing homelessness, so I'm doing some child welfare advocacy now, and a little bit of both. But both of those are my passion of like, we need to really co-design, abolish some of the systems, and but abolish with a solution. Like, I don't agree that like you just get rid of everything, because that doesn't make sense. Like, we need to really be realistic and about how do we also meet people's needs. So that's kind of my why.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for doing that work. Now, Josh, tell us your weird story.
Yeah, It's a weird one, but it is mine. So, 12 years ago, I was a Baptist pastor in Dallas, Texas. Originally from North Carolina, moved there for my master's studies in theology at Dallas Baptist University. So in 2014, I was starting a church in an arts neighborhood near downtown Dallas named Deep Ellum. And long story short, there just being, a part of the neighborhood, which was, my strategy of starting a church. You should not start any kind of human or social services in a neighborhood and not be a part of the neighborhood. And so that's where my journey began, and which led me to conversations with people in the neighborhood who were queer or trans and had experienced homelessness as a direct result of family rejection due to theological belief. And so, in layman's terms, their parents kicked them out because of their religious belief. And I didn't attack the belief early on. What frustrated me and what I voiced within Baptist leadership was we have a crisis that we caused, and in part. And so when we look at the disproportionality of LGBTQ youth experiencing homelessness, which I did, I started asking the question where you started this podcast of how widespread is this? So I started there and I did my own research and come to find out it wasn't a Dallas problem. This this is a widespread problem. And so I started asking questions and I was willing to hold the tension, the balance of two things that did not look like they could go together of still pastoring a church and taking care of our most vulnerable. And the Baptist denomination did not agree with my theory and said it's either or. And so that led me down the path of advocacy. And it started with LGBTQ youth homelessness. And I had no policy chops. And so that led me down the path to advocacy. And so around that same time, a council member who was the chair for the Dallas LGBT task force, for the mayor's task force, posted about LGBT youth homelessness, looking to find solutions. I had done all of this research, but all of the research at the time was focused on Washington State, California, in New York. And being a Southern Baptist pastor from North Carolina, born and raised in the South in a Republican household, I knew that we were going to have to do things differently and from these other three states. And so I brought all this research. I had some, here's step one solutions. And then I got voluntold to lead the task force subcommittee. And I'm like, but I don't have a job now, and I'm trying to figure that out. And so it started in volunteer capacity. What eventually became a nonprofit focused on that issue, grew legs, started running, and we realized the gap from bringing stakeholders together was in public policy. We had awareness with faith communities on, holding that tension, the tension that I thought that you could. And some folks agreed, many did not. But we had that component. We had the cultural competency trainings for direct care, the crisis, and then the long-term solutions was the gap, and that was public policy. And then started digging in there and fell in love with the process. Um, and grew to hate the process. So it's a love-hate relationship to this day. But that's where I fell in love and kind of started to see more of a career path for me. And now doing this at the federal stage, and as well as our state and local work with Away Home America. But that's where it started, and that's what keeps me rooted. I think too often, as we see in our political climate, especially, is we do either or too much, and we can't dig into the nuance, and then that creates the division that we see, and then it exacerbates social and human issues such as youth homelessness.
And then when you tie money to that, it makes it even more entrenched, that difference. And I think that leads, I want to talk about, misconceptions. But before we do that, you mentioned early on about how you focus on these subgroups and the marginalized youth, because if we can solve homelessness for the marginalized youth, I believe you said, we can solve it writ large. And I know you probably have a paper about that, and we will hyperlink to it, but in like a really short way, like an elevator speech kind of thing. Can you tell me what you mean by that? Why do you believe so strongly, Josh, that fixing homelessness for those most marginalized would actually fix it for everyone?
Yeah, I'll use a great example that my boss and colleague Marcella Middleton, our CEO, who has lived expertise with Away Home America, shares when asked the same question. And so imagine I'm in a wheelchair and I'm trying to get into a public building, but there's no ramp, right? So now I can't get into said public building. But if we build a ramp, that doesn't mean that folks who are not in a wheelchair can't get into the building. It's the same principle that we're not taking away from your ability to access this service. We're just making sure folks who historically have not been able to access the service now can as well.
It makes perfect sense. On the podcast, we try to clear up misunderstandings or misconceptions about homelessness or housing insecurity. Can each of you give me one example? I know that there's many, but one example of a misconception that you confront regularly with regard to youth homelessness. So if you wanted to start.
Yeah, thank you. One thing that came up talking to young people was feeling like they have to look like this, what media shows, what youth homelessness what homelessness looks like. And so when receiving service, how do they, look like what media is actually getting wrong? And so I think that's one misconception of what homelessness looks like and what homeless actually looks like. And feeling the pressure to act a certain way.
Josh?
Yeah, I touched on the targeted universalism misconception, so I'll give a different one. One policy area that both Sofie and I focus on is direct cash transfer, guaranteed income. And the one misconception around that, or one of the many, is that folks won't use money for the quote unquote right thing. Yet we're easy to forget that we all received a stimulus check back in 2020, and data has shown that folks who needed to use that to pay a bill or what have you for basic needs did so. And so we get caught up so much. We're basically seeing people at their worst rather than giving them an opportunity, which we've already seen proven that folks can rise to that occasion.
Yeah, there's empirical support. I mean, there are research studies that show even small amounts of money can raise people up and give them the stability they need. So
Not
what?
only that, sorry, not only that, it happens every day in traditional households. I'm sorry, but like it just looks different. It's just maybe not public policy,
Right.
but it's something that happens every day in parents giving money or grandparents or so.
Well, it was your analogy, right, Sophie? When you said it, the trampoline in the backyard, some of us have the supports to prevent us from actually falling off the edge, and some of
Yeah,
us don't.
yeah,
And so, if we have a government entities that can give us that support, then people can rise to the occasion. They can move on and they can fail, but not fail long term. So what are some next steps? What is on the horizon for both of you with regard to this issue? What kind of policies are you working on? What's coming next?
some of the things that I'm working on right now and like hoping to continue to work on and when it comes to this is like, Josh mentioned the direct cash, flexible cash in the hands as a housing initiative, really looking at what is the sustainability of that. using public dollars. And so that's some of the work I'm doing. And regarding child welfare, really, I'm doing a policy residency with Foster America, working with fellows who are claiming officers within agencies and figuring out what are some claiming ways what are strategies to claim public dollars are already allocated but are just sitting and give in the hands, like think about different ways to use those dollars, creative ways, if that's keeping families together. Family unity is a key aspect of it, or the way we train motivational interviews. So just working with different fellows and figuring out what are ways. So it's going to be a series of about financial briefs, thinking about ways to use public dollars better.
Yeah, and targeting solutions, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
Good. And Josh?
Yeah, programmatically, I'd be remiss if I didn't plug those. So on July 16th, Way Home America will be hosting our annual Trash and Treasure, which we take a look at the state legislative landscape of policies that should belong in the trash and policies that are treasure for youth and young adults experiencing homelessness. We always have a few state legislators join us and talk broadly about the issues. And then we'll have a community weigh-in follow-up September 3rd. You can register for those by going to our website, and then you can also sign up for our newsletter while you're there and get more information on how you can join us on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. On September 23rd for a New Deal to End Youth Homelessness Advocacy Day, where we'll continue towards the end of this Congress pushing for some of those pieces of legislation that are in our policy agenda that I mentioned earlier. So those are the two big things, and the Trash and Treasure component is related to our Transforming the Way Home initiative, and our 3 pilot communities are North Carolina, Texas, and Los Angeles, California. So.
Great. And I assume that people who want to get involved or are interested, if they're listening to this podcast and want to volunteer or learn more, they can go to your organization's website. And Sofie, where can they go to get more information about the programs that you support?
Yeah, for my support, the briefs are coming out later. One brief is coming out the end of hopefully next month. And then it's a series every 3 months. So they'll come out. And then there's a housing convening that I'll be in DC in May.
Perfect. And so hopefully when we push this out, we'll also include links to all of those resources so that it's easy for people to find, because I do think that this is a really important issue that a lot of people care about and do want to feel like they're contributing and doing something. And I think you've given them a lot to think about. So thank you so much for this conversation, Sofie and Josh. And thank you so much for joining us today on this episode of The Bells I Hear. Thank you for tuning in to the Bells I Hear podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to the Bells I Hear and follow us on social media. We post all of our conversations on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. You can connect with us on Instagram and post comments or questions that we can address on upcoming shows. More information can also be found on Blogger and Substack. So many ways to learn about the issues surrounding housing insecurity. Please join us and contribute to the conversation.